Welcome back to the Real Femme Sapien YouTube channel where I give cultural commentary, and I oftentimes scour the internet for what you guys might call pick-me's, but remember, it's better to be a pick-me than a skip-me. And so I found the smartest pick-me that I could possibly find, and we're going to debunk some of the trad wife myths, because I know you guys are out there, and you really do think that you're going to find this magical woman who loves to live in an apron and who likes to be barefoot in the kitchen, pregnant, and would also milk cows for you. But unfortunately, she does not exist, and we know firsthand because we unfortunately have been forced to socialize with these women on Twitter. So if you like this content, make sure you give it a big thumbs up, subscribe down below, and hit the notification bell. Our guest today is Megha. Megha, why don't you introduce yourself to the people and tell them a little bit about what you do?
Hi, I'm Megha, and I teach art history online. I focus on teaching art history the proper way rather than being captured by a lot of the modern Marxist ideologies that have poisoned our understanding of the arts and humanities. And I guess I was roped into this because I was raised in a traditional household with loving parents and a healthy relationship, and it was very perplexing to me that some of my views about relationships and family were considered at first trad, but then also rejected by that same movement. So it's a very weird online space because my views seem to superficially overlap with the trad, movement, which is, the most prominent anti-feminist movement on the internet. But at the same time, they don't agree in a lot of places. And also, my views come from things that I learned from my parents and my family rather than from the internet memes or caricatures or any kind of rebellion that I'm trying to do. So that's how I fit into this conversation.
Yeah, my experience with the trad community is a little bit different. I wasn't expecting to run into them. All of the traditional conservative women that I've met in real life, they're actually very sweet women. But online, I noticed that there's a lot of hypocrisy. And I thought the same thing, that the ways that I think about romance would be accepted by these women because of what they preach, which are things like submission and traditionalism and masculinity and femininity. But that is not true at all. I've actually been flamed a couple of times, not just from these women, but I've also been flamed by the red pill community too. And a common critique that I've gotten has been about my age gap, and they're like, well, that's not traditional. I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't realize like Ruth and Boaz didn't exist. That surprised me. So that was one avenue on the trad side where it's like the age of your husband doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, matter if you have traditional values. Your husband can be your age or he can be older. I just didn't see how the fact that my husband being older somehow is not, in some sense, it's malaligned with traditionalism. And then from the red pill community, they have this archetype in their mind, right? This older man with this younger woman. So I went out and I did the dang thing. I married this man. I'm currently in my second trimester of our first child, and they actually don't mean that either. They will grill you about this age gap as well, which I found just to be really frustrating. But you would think that they would be happy for you, that you have some kind of a marriage dynamic that is functional and works for you, because it helps with the common mission, which would be, the culture war that the right loses of their own doing, really. But that does not align with reality, and a lot of the women are hypocritical. You've talked about a couple of these hypocritical things. Mostly, I've seen you really unravel how they kind of are seductresses. The ones that portray themselves to be trad, but then are not trad. Can you explain what that looks like?
Oh my gosh, I have so much to say about what you just said. Well, first of all, I think any person whose life is defined by bitterness and anger will not be happy for others when they are happy. It doesn't matter what they purport their politics to be. So, for example, the trad community is made up largely, online, is made up largely of women who are very frustrated and sad, maybe even resentful about their upbringing and the lack of cultural guidance that they were given. And so I think it's for that reason that they can't be happy for someone like you, and they have to find something to critique so that they can still feel better than everyone else, because being controversial in itself is their goal, not necessarily the values that they purport to espouse. So in a different time period, in the 20s, they would have been flappers. In the 60s, they would have been the hippies. Like, pick any decade, they would have been the countercultural movement. And that arises from, a disjointed upbringing or a toxic culture that didn't give them the kind of identity and cultural guidance that they needed. So, for example, I've faced something similar. It seems like I followed the protocol as well, like, marrying someone that I fell in love with, getting my parents' permission, doing everything the traditional way. And yet it seems like, they have a problem because it's a mixed race couple. So it's like, well, it just reveals to me that really they don't believe in love and fairy tale love and that kind of stuff. They just want to hate other people to feel better about themselves. That's what I diagnose as the issue there. And when you were talking about, and of course the same thing applies to red pill, like it's like it goes without saying, it's made up of very bitter and pessimistic people. So if you acknowledge someone's happiness and you're a pessimistic person, it causes you an existential crisis because it's a threat to your identity and your idea about the world and how it works.
Sorry, you're just like blowing my mind. No, you're just like, so many things are clicking for me that I didn't think were going to click in this conversation. Guys, in the comment section down below, let us know if Megha should start a YouTube channel. I'm trying to convince her, but, she's just a really fabulous writer. Even my husband thinks so too. I showed him your articles. He
really?
loves them. So if we can convince her to cam up on occasion, we'll try. Tell us in the comment section down below if you want her to come back. But continue about these disgruntled, pessimistic people whose identities are threatened by our joy, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And, the seductress archetype of this trad online woman that you were talking about, they're like a different type because they're upset with feminism for the wrong reasons. They're upset because, it forces them to work and to earn a living and, you don't get as many freebies. And that's the wrong reason to dislike feminism because most women throughout history have worked. It wasn't some kind of suffrage girl power movement. It's just because they had to make ends meet or because, the woman had some interests, intellectual or otherwise, outside of her domestic duties or, her kids grew up and now she wants to do something interesting with her life in the next season. So a lot of these, the women, they just want the freebies, but they don't want to work in any way, and that's why they dislike feminism. So it's like a different approach to it, which I think is wrong because then it treats a man like an object as well, because then he's just like, your wallet instead of a human being that you love. I think that the ones you're specifically referring to are the ones who are very promiscuous in the way that they present themselves. And I think that comes from taking on these values as memes and caricatures rather than understanding them at a deep level. So for example, Brittany Martinez is a woman that I actually really like a lot, and she's a great example of a woman who doesn't just take on the caricature of traditionalism, but actually is probably was raised in a very good family, and the values form an architecture for who she is rather than just a costume that she wears. She's the editor of Evie magazine. I think these women who are on either extreme, where they only wear peasant dresses and potato sack dresses, or they wear completely promiscuous clothes online, in front of other people, I think they're both kind of confused in different ways. Whereas the women who understand at some deeper level about how to present themselves so that they still maintain their respect while also enjoying their beauty, that is something that you can only get when you really understand these values at a deep level.
Wow. Very well done. Very well done. Well said. Well said even. My issue with, I would say, the seductress type of the trad LARPers, so their live action role playing, is some of these women are influencers and they will be in their 20s and they'll tell other women that they need to get married and have babies as quickly as possible to make sure that they are also modest in appearance, but they will do the exact opposite themselves. And if you are working in social media at all, appearance is a big component to it. So it's not like a woman who isn't beautiful is going to get a very large audience unless her quality of content is just absolutely spectacular and the value speaks for itself. That's not going to be most of these women who end up being social media influencers in the first place, which is part of a critique that the Red Pill community will have when it comes to female entrepreneurship. And I don't think that they're wrong. I just think that these women, they have a platform and they have beauty and they have a message, but there's also what I think needs to be a responsibility to live your message, because why are you telling other women to not be, provocative or promiscuous, and you're out there doing the exact same thing, just maybe on different platforms, or you're telling other women not to wait and that the value of a family is so important to you, but we don't really see you taking action steps for that. And I know people date and keep their relationships private, and I think that's so smart and wise to do, just because it's good to protect the people that you love. But it can kind of lead you to question their authority to speak on the situation. And there's things that they could say just lightly out loud. I don't share a lot of details about my personal life, but I am actively dating. I do hold these values, but they'll never come out and they'll say that. And some of these women are just so beautiful that they have a tendency to do what you would expect them to, which is to wait until the last possible moment in order to get married. And I've posed that question multiple times, where I just don't think that there is much of a difference between liberal women and conservative women, depending on what lenses you use to look at them. Either way, the statistics when it comes to women and reproduction, it's 50.1% of women in the UK are childless by age 30. I am so sure that that also includes some conservative women who are still waiting for their husband but are not taking the appropriate steps to do so. And again, like gorgeous women, the social media influencers that I'm talking about, they get opportunities and they get offers that a lot of women will never have access to, but they don't accept them either. And I get it, like you should live your life for yourself. Just understand that it conflicts and contradicts with what you're telling your audience. Because if I was a smart woman, I would look at these women and I wouldn't believe anything that they had to say. I would, if I valued what their content was, I would just have them on the back burner. It's nice, but we're still waiting to see if what she has to say is going to match up with reality. But I think that's a lot of the times why women end up not really being that influential in the culture war at times on the conservative side. I do think that if women want something as a group and a collective, they will get the dang thing done, which is problematic in itself. But yeah, the conservative women, I just don't find them to be very convincing individuals. What are your thoughts so far?
Wow, I have to collect my thoughts, actually. There's so much. I'm ready to say something. Well, I think they themselves are confused at some level. There's two sides to this. One is that they don't really, they want to stand out, and women, especially before they're married, before they're not just married, I think there are a lot of women who are married, but they're not married. Do you know what I mean? Where they're not spiritually owned. I would say that, there's women who are ardently in love with their husbands to the point where they're spiritually owned by them in some way, if that makes sense. And there's wives who just kind of settled and they don't really respect or admire their husbands that much. So anyway, what I'm trying to say with this is before a woman is owned by that kind of love, she really wants attention and she wants to maximize it, and that's natural. And I think that the easiest way to get attention is to be controversial and countercultural. And today's counterculture is to be right-wing, to be anti-feminist, etc. And there are some women who are genuinely interested in the discussions, like Sydney Watson is a great example. She's genuinely interested in a lot of these anti-feminist discussions, and her YouTube channel is great. She she writes out thoughtful pieces about what she has to say rather than just superficial one-dimensional platitudes. Whereas I think the women you're talking about, they rely on these one-dimensional platitudes in order to gain attention, where the men who are also one-dimensional right-wing, they give them this attention. And it's very similar to an OnlyFans type of situation where they're just getting attention for their bodies. It's very cheap attention, and cheap attention never leads you in the right direction in life. Attention is not a bad thing. Everybody needs attention to live. It's just you have to judge where that attention is coming from and of what quality it is. The other side of this is that they themselves might be very confused, and they look at these end goals like getting married and having kids, and they're correct that, these are important things for a woman to figure out in her 20s or as soon as possible. But they themselves don't know how to achieve that. And so they constantly repeat the end goal, but their methods are not there. And the important thing, I wish, if any young ladies are listening to this, the important thing is not merely to get married and have kids. The important thing is to marry the right person and to have kids with someone who will be a good father. Because I know women in real life who have not made the right decision, even though they did it in a timely way, and they ended up making their children's lives terrible, their own lives terrible, and just getting married and having kids is not enough to give you a satisfying life. You need someone who understands you, who loves you and cherishes you, and who you respect and truly admire. And I think if you need to figure out a lot of things in your life before you can meet that person, if you just haven't met that person yet, it's not the end of the world, and you shouldn't settle just because you're 29 or you're 32 and you're older and people are pressuring you all around. So that's the difference between valuing marriage versus using it as a vehicle for your political message. And that's what I think about these women, that if they just actually valued the message, they would try to, I think they're just confused. And I think if they actually thought deeply about the methods, then their lives would be better.
This is true. You talked about this, and it didn't really hit home for me until the following events occurred, and this is probably going to make you laugh. So you talked about how they have this big build-up about getting married and having children, and just how short this window of child rearing is. And I ended up getting a PS5, and I started playing The Sims, and you could see these little Sim babies. Because I had a homemaker sim. Because, why wouldn't I have a homemaker sim? Fun fact, there's a cottagecore pack that you can buy if you want to add the cows and the chickens. Go ahead.
I was talking with my husband, and I realized that women love games that give them a god complex because we love controlling things. Because I used to play Sim City,
I definitely agree.
Yeah, I love organizing the city and deciding where the buildings go. It just gave me so much satisfaction. I was like, yes, yeah. I should be the ruler of the world.
That's how I feel with Skyrim, too. So for The Sims, I had this homemaker sim. She had a little high-value man, but she had these babies, and these babies, they grew up and they became adults, and it kind of just seemed like she didn't have a whole lot to do. She ended up getting a job, and when this was happening, I was like, Megha is really spitting some facts here, because it's true. That's why I get a little bit frustrated with women when they talk about, they look at marriage and children as this big hindrance. And it can be if you marry the wrong man. Do not get me wrong. But it's like the sun is going to set on that one day, and you're going to have whatever your independent individual life, whatever you want, you'll get that back. It's going to look different. Maybe your kids will be in college, maybe you'll have grandchildren. They're still going to be integrated within your life, but you can pursue your own personal passions after you're done raising children. It's a short window. And on top of that, you can pursue your passions while you're raising the children. It's just if it comes down to time management and you have to put it on the back burner, that's okay. Nobody said you couldn't come back. My grandmother lives a wonderful life where she's just retired with my granddad, and they just hang out and watch TV all day because they want to. But she's also got plenty of time to do her crafts or her Christmas time side hustle and things like that. I don't think women hear from other women about what the other side is like that often, probably because those women would be fulfilled and busy and not on the internet. We have a colleague, her name is Jenny. She is pretty much on the other side of that for the most part. She's got teenagers at this point in time. So it's good when I get to hear her commentary, or when we get to hear commentary from empty nesters that actually love each other and didn't stay together for the kids. It's just that you're not going to run into a whole lot of happily married people who have been married 20, 30, 40 years coming out on the internet and sharing their insights because they've got fulfilling lives. So that is my take on that. I did want to talk to you about the deconstructing of women, because the way that you worded it, I'm going to paraphrase and then you just expand. I'll give you my paraphrase. So basically, if you read a book on the right wing, that will turn you into a man. And then on the left wing, you can just buy all the body parts of being a woman. Can you explain how both sides deconstruct a woman and how that cheapens her soul, spirit even?
So, yeah, what you're referring to is from my article called The Artificial Woman. And I wrote it because I saw damaging aspects on both sides of the political spectrum. Not to like make it a binary, but that's such a convenient way to think about it. So basically, on the left wing, on the leftist side, I guess, we have artificial wombs, surrogacy. We have women who freeze their eggs. There's gay couples who rent surrogates. I think I already said that. There's trans women. So they're, individuals who put on the identity of a woman using makeup, fake breasts, fake lips, fillers, etc., hair extensions. It's like you can buy all the body parts of a woman and somehow glue them all together and make a Frankenstein woman on the leftist side. And the traditional side is like, okay, no, we don't do artificial things, we do things the natural way. However, they're equally as culpable, because the way that right wing would say, like extremists, like the men and the women, how they talk about themselves and each other, is that they reduce women to their utility as a domestic entity. So, there's this many eggs left in her carton, she's 30, or she, her beauty can be measured by her fertility, and, breasts are for feeding babies and arms are for carrying laundry, and can she milk a cow, or can she run a homestead? Like, it's all of the things, like, can she do this? Can she bake a cake well? Can she make, I don't know, sourdough bread from scratch? It's like all of these utilities of a woman, but both sides neglect the soul, which is the core of a human being that you fall in love with. And I think if a man doesn't love a woman, you can't actually have a genuine family. And if you just love the body parts, whether you're a leftist or you're on the right wing, you can't nurture the relationship, the healthy relationship that would raise healthy children, healthy families as you need to. That's the extrapolation of that idea. And I really wanted to pick up some interesting points about what you said earlier. I mean, I hate to quote Andrew Tate, but it was just so he said, like, people who are starving constantly talk about food. And I think that applies to the 20-something-year-old spinsters who constantly talk about getting married and having babies because they don't have it yet. And once they have it, they stop talking about it. And of course, because they're so young, they don't have, and they're usually really dumb too, like they don't have any interests. They can't stop talking about what they desperately want and don't have yet. And they don't have any life experience to talk, or wisdom to talk about the seasonality of life, that understands one stage ends and another one begins, and it takes a different shape, and life isn't just a constant routine that stays the same forever. And I'll give a really spicy example for this. It's going to be kind of offensive, but my mom has about 15 really close girlfriends, and my mom's in her 50s. Some of her friends are moms. I mean, all of them are moms. Some are grandmoms. So they all had their families. And all of her close friends, they run businesses, or they have hobbies and interests. Like, they're all really intelligent women doing interesting things. And all of the women that my mom doesn't talk to in the family and in society are all the toxic gossips, are all the stay-at-home moms who did nothing but have kids and take care of the house. Because their minds are not engaged, and an idle mind is the devil's playground. I don't know where that's from, but yeah, so if your only goal as a woman in life is to get married, have babies, and you don't have any other interests, ambitions, pursuits, you're basically asking to become the toxic gossip auntie who everybody dislikes and no one wants to hang out with when you're older.
This explains so much that I've seen in real life.
They're already toxic
Just like
gossip
reviewing
aunties
the
now.
tapes.
They're already those
Yeah.
aunties, like in many ways.
Yeah, it's true. You do have to keep your mind sharp. And one of the ways that you can keep your mind sharp through motherhood is just researching parenting techniques. I have some really great friends. I think that they're anarchists. They might dispute this. I do not know. I just know that they love America and they're atheist. And the wife, I mean, she's been staying home with the kids for a couple of years now. I think their oldest might be 5 or 6. She's still very sharp and she still listens to podcasts that I guess people might consider esoteric, but she'll sit and she'll listen to them about politics, economy, medicine, and she also does a lot of research into what parenting methods are probably going to work best for a child. They have a whole Montessori house, which that is a nerdy subject that I could get into at any point in time. But you can keep your mind sharp with motherhood or aside from motherhood, because not every mom, I think, has the intelligence to homeschool. You've talked about this a couple of times. So, whatever method it takes to keep your mind sharp, that's going to be helpful. Because I've had this conversation with my husband too, because I've been staying home. I don't have any children. I do YouTube. But it doesn't mean that it's not turning my mind to mush like a little bit. Like it's definitely turning it into some kind of mush, just a tad. So I do try to stimulate my mind in reality as well. So I agree with your assessment on that, and it's kind of a pity because you would think that these women who stay home, whose minds are not sharpened, just because they chose not to, you would think their houses would be immaculate. This is also not true. And sometimes they're quite messy. I've seen this phenomenon a lot, mostly in the military, because when it comes to the military, your marriage is basically subsidized, which can lead to unhappy marriages that people like to go into for reasons like we've talked about, just because she wants to get married and have children, looking at a man more so as a wallet. When these women are confronted with the reality of staying home and their husbands do work long hours, it's 40 to 60 hours a week if you're active duty military, they don't really socialize much or accomplish much. I'm sorry, I'm just talking about on the average. It's an interesting demographic of women to study. And it's unfortunate because I think the reason why there are so many military housewives, not just for the subsidizing, is I think that the military at times can be one of our last patriarchal cultures that we have. Even though women can serve, it's mostly men serving. And so their goal, their idea, the trad idea for these soldiers, sadly, is to have a wife who has children and stays home. So I did want to ask you about what, in your mind, modern traditionalism is, because I define myself as a modern woman with traditional values. I can't take back the economic leverage that women have. I can't take back hormonal birth control. These realities exist and it's among us, and so we're very liberated as women. It can be a really awesome thing or it can be a detriment. But what do you think modern traditionalism would be?
I think it's just an understanding that the way that our ancestors organized their relationships and their families had some wisdom in it, and we would do well to emulate some of those strategies. I think that's all it is. And the best way to learn it is from people who come from good families in real life rather than from the internet memes.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, and some examples of it are just, like how do you split the chores between a man and a woman? How do you organize finances together? How do you make decisions together about childcare, about finances, about travel, all of these things? I think that's all it comes down to. It can also come down to, how do you comport yourself in public? There's the traditional way to do things, and there is a modern way to do things. And modern is a very interesting word because all it means is the way that things are done now, which it's always been changing. So I think it's a very interesting word because modern in India, modern in China, modern in in Syria, Palestine is different than modern in America. So I think you have to keep, I think people who expose themselves to more cultures are also more aware of the biases that their own culture has put in their minds as the only way to do things. So, when you learn about other cultures and when you study history, it tells you that there are other ways to do something that you might never have thought of.
I agree with that. I think the world is a great teacher. Like, I'm not opposed to women, spending their early 20s if for some reason they are still confused or they're not able to get the attention of a desirable man that they are joyful and exuberant to marry and have as children. I'm not opposed to these women getting an education and studying the world and traveling the world. Doing that sincerely doesn't necessarily translate to the promiscuity stereotype. You can do these things without sleeping with men. I don't know how these two things got conflated. Mm-hmm.
That's because, the red pill community is made up of a lot of loser guys who have never been really good with women. So they kind of compensate by projecting the most negative type of woman onto everyone. And that's where that comes from. I personally, the first time I went on a solo trip was to England last year, and on the 4th day I met my husband, so it's not a good example. But when, I had been traveling for a couple of days, and it felt very nice. It was so exciting. I loved going to the museums. I loved spending time on my own because I could spend as long as I wanted in an art museum or at a tourist place, and I didn't have to worry that I was boring someone else. But then, close to the end of that week, I was starting to feel a little bit lonely because I had no one to share the beautiful sights I was seeing with. I've always just traveled with my family. So I think the women who travel alone as a goal in their life, they're they issue marriage and family because they say, well, I want to travel the world. It's well, you don't have to pick either or. You can travel the world with your husband and your family. In fact, it's probably more fun because you can share the experience with someone.
Oh, yeah. I love traveling with my husband. Or, staycations, too. Staycations are underrated and slept on.